Hello, I'm John Riggins, and this is the 5th episode of Bitcoin in Asia, where we are taking on the numbering system of buildings in China. Our guest this week is Richard Bensberg, a Beijinger and the newly appointed Director of Sales and Integrations at Blockstream, where he is initially focused on their liquid product. Really excited for this conversation because Richard is really an OG Beijing Bitcoiner who has not been super public and has some fun and relevant stories and thoughts on Bitcoin in China over the past 7 years. Richard got his start in Bitcoin in the early days of OkCoin, where he was managing compliance before leaving to found his own company, Remitsy, a money transfer business using Bitcoin that was later acquired by Wyre. Richard ran their Asia business and, as mentioned, recently joined Blockstream, still out of Beijing. So a lot of fun tidbits here, and I hope you enjoy. We're here in Saigon for the 5-year anniversary of Bitcoin Saigon.
Yep.
Fun week. You were one of the luminaries to be invited in to keynote the conference. So, in the presence of a keynote here. Really just a super interesting background of being in Bitcoin early, being a long time China hand is what they would call you outside of here, but really, founder and entrepreneur in China in your own right outside of any of that. So excited to get into this. I also feel like you're kind of a mysterious figure in Bitcoin. You've done a lot, but you've been kind of in Beijing. You haven't talked a ton publicly, so I think it'll be fun to get you on the record with some stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess it's not a conscious decision that I've necessarily made in terms of not being kind of public and out there. It's simply a function of kind of what I'm interested in and like how I've been in the Bitcoin community. So I've definitely been a lurker more than an influencer. But
I think Neil called me a lurker yesterday. I was kind of offended.
but I've seen some stuff, so hopefully it'll be an interesting conversation.
Heck yeah. So to start off, of course, with the old cliche, how just your entrance into Bitcoin. I didn't actually know this until just this week, is that it had to do with your brother. So just take us back to then, how you found out about Bitcoin for the first time, and just kind of that process.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wish there was kind of like a light bulb moment that I could sort of say, I read the white paper and I immediately understood the potential of Bitcoin, yada, yada, yada. But I just don't think I was either that smart or that sort of plugged in to realize at the time. Mm-hmm. So I don't actually remember the first time reading the white paper, but I guess back in 2012, 2013, mm-hmm. I was working for a company in what you'd call Regtech now, so sort of compliance-based technology.
Regtech.
Regtech, yeah. I don't think that name existed at the time, but it does now. And yeah, I just sort of came across Bitcoin more and more. So I talked with family members, trying not to dox them too much, about this stuff, and also thinking about it from a company perspective. Is there kind of any products that the banks could potentially use that would allow them to kind of interact better with Bitcoiners? Mm-hmm. But really, I wanted to kind of understand the technology before I even sort of think about putting out a product related to it. So yeah, I just dove in basically. So I spun up a wallet, which at the time was also a node. I started mining Bitcoin, but only on my laptop, not on my laptop, my desktop.
From Beijing?
At the time, I was in between the UK and Singapore. And yeah, I just dove in like that, sort of try to understand the technology. That's the kind of approach I've always taken with new stuff. Try to kind of understand it, and the way I understand it is not by like reading white papers or like talking to people necessarily. It's just sort of getting stuck in. Yeah. So I guess I was around Bitcoin Talk back in the day, reading a lot of stuff on that. Lurking, and also lurking on the BTC Trollbox. I think that was a
RIP,
a really good education. And that's kind of how I learned. I didn't really kind of get into the whole Reddit scene. I was late onto the kind of Twitter scene. I was late onto the kind of WeChat groups, but I was kind of always there in the background. And then when it was the right time to get involved, I jumped in. So maybe this is the start of many a podcast. I don't know. We'll see how this one goes.
Yeah, and you say late, but it's really all relative. Where you felt like you were late then, but you're ahead of the curve in a big way. And so maybe a little more context about what you were doing when you found Bitcoin. So you had been working in Regtech, sort of on, I guess, kind of compliance side, helping people in China manage. That's just take us through that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So actually, it wasn't more on the compliance side. It was more on the kind of technology side, more of the kind of management of the tech companies. So previously, after graduating from university and everything, I kind of ended up taking the first job that somebody offered me, and it just happened to lead me down this kind of path into sort of investigations, due diligence kind of work. Obviously, with my kind of background speaking Chinese, then that was kind of helpful to.
Did you learn Chinese in university?
Yes, I studied Chinese and economics at a university in the UK. Spent 2 years in China as part of that course. Ended up back in the UK, found this job, and ended up getting sent kind of around the world following that. So yeah, it's kind of started in kind of due diligence stuff, but I always kind of lean towards the tech side of the business. So finding areas where could improve kind of business processes and bring in technology to do that. Had an interest in technology from an early age, and my father, in fact, is a coder. So I had kind of that a little bit of that background, although I didn't really jump in on it as hard as I should have early on, and so I'm still in the position now where I'm like trying to learn to code. But yeah, that's how I kind of got into that whole industry. In the end, I ended up in this company that was offering compliance software to banks in the UK. So I was running the company. I got brought in through some kind of contacts that I had.
Okay.
Just having done this due diligence stuff for a while, and obviously with my background in kind of enjoying like using tech to improve stuff. So brought into this Regtech company
to run it.
And to run that. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a small company at the time, 35, 40 people. And yeah, we sort of started from there. And that's kind of the time that I learned about Bitcoin. So I was spending my time during that job between the UK and Asia. I wasn't actually living in the UK, although the company was headquartered there.
Yeah.
So I was kind of half and half in terms of my time. And yeah, after finding out Bitcoin, I just started going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. And start building a little stuff on your own, getting your hands in it.
Yeah, it's one of those rabbit holes that you can't climb out of again. So
I can attest you have not climbed out of the rabbit hole.
I've not climbed out the rabbit hole. So yeah, at the time it was simply a case of getting my hands on the technology, downloading the Bitcoin client. Like I said, mining, albeit tiny amounts. At the time, it was not possible to kind of self-mine using your GPU, and I didn't bother sort of setting up racks of GPUs. I just had my own machine kind of chugging away and doing what it could on a pool, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, as I kind of got to kind of understand the technology more, I kind of got more and more kind of interested in it for the tech, obviously. So. I wish I could say I was in it for the mad gains, but but seriously, yeah. I could have. I didn't kind of understand the concept of HODL, I guess. So instead of realizing that and realizing kind of the real kind of use case and the potential for kind of saving money with Bitcoin, instead I was pinging payments every 5 minutes to Satoshi Dice and things like that. Yeah. And so. That's why I'm here in Saigon at the kind of old school kind of Asian OG event rather than a posh kind of conference somewhere in the US.
Bitcoins were lost on frivolous pursuits like Satoshi Dice back in the day.
It was frivolous, and I regret it entirely, but it was all part of the education.
100%. And so you're kind of tinkering around and in and out of Asia. Running a small to mid-sized company. When did you kind of start thinking about going into Bitcoin commercially full time, and like what were you thinking about as like options at that point?
Yeah, so I don't know whether I kind of even considered like the commercial kind of side of things for a while, but I guess I got more and more deep into Bitcoin and really kind of wanting to pursue it. And yet at the same time, I realized I didn't know anywhere near enough. So albeit running a Bitcoin client on my machine and CG miner or BG miner or whatever it was called to actually mine those coins, it's a far cry away from like all of those kind of businesses that were set up on Bitcoin, and understanding kind of how transactions work and even understanding how mining works. I was still at a very kind of limited level. And to this day, Bitcoin is such a huge topic that it's really kind of hard to really master it. Yeah. And I certainly haven't. But yeah, once I was kind of in there and I was doing this stuff, it was taking up more and more of my time. I was spending more and more time lurking on the forums, etc. And I decided, okay, if I can't create a product myself, then the best way to kind of learn about this will be to join a company who is already doing this stuff. And to be honest, I was spending too much time away from China, and I wanted to be back in Beijing. So eventually the opportunity came to me where I could join OkCoin, and I decided to basically jump on it.
Heck yeah, OkCoin. Can you give us some context into the Bitcoin market in China at the time? OkCoin is one of the, obviously behemoths today. Back then it was one of the few companies there. Just a little context in Bitcoin in Beijing and in China.
Yeah, so I guess that was 2014 that I joined OkCoin, and to be honest, it feels ages away.
Really nice.
I mean, like in Bitcoin time is different to normal time. So 5 years is an eternity. So I'll try to remember it accurately, but I'm not sure I will. I guess. So OkCoin and Huobi were one of the two sort of big Bitcoin exchanges at the time. Between the two of them, arguably one of them was the largest kind of exchange in the world, and it depended what metric you used as to which company claimed that crown. But really, in terms of Bitcoin scene, I think it was still very kind of early. So we were at OkCoin, a company of 100 plus people when I joined. Yeah. So it was a very kind of small international team. I think the week that I joined was the week that OkCoin's kind of international English language site launched. So before that, it was all just Chinese. Okay. So it was already a big entity before it kind of had that kind of international exposure.
And there were already Westerners there too.
Yeah. So I was the third, I think, a Western employee, and yeah. So I guess the scene was still very early in the sense that we were a team of 100 plus people, and within that team, there's probably about 3 or 4 kind of Bitcoiners. So I joined the team because I wanted to kind of work in Bitcoin. We subsequently got some other people on the team who were there for Bitcoin rather than being there for a job. But in that sense, it was a kind of more traditional kind of like China tech company. It was in the area where all of the tech companies are, where Baidu, Lenovo, all of those guys are. And it had a lot of people who didn't necessarily kind of care a huge amount about Bitcoin. They were there because it was an interesting tech job in a kind of interesting sector, but they didn't necessarily dive into it in a huge way.
Yeah. Were you kind of someone internally who was pushing to, hey, let's hire more Bitcoiners? Or where did that come from?
I don't think we ever got to that stage, to be honest.
People were seeking it out, I guess.
Yeah. So the people who were seeking it out sort of came to the company, and we just hired the best people for the job. And in a few cases, it turned out that those were hardcore Bitcoiners, but in the majority of cases, we still ended up with a lot of people who didn't necessarily have their focus on Bitcoin. They just wanted to be in a fintech company. So while we were at OkCoin, I think there was a good community of kind of a few Bitcoiners in Beijing, but they happened to be kind of mostly sort of expat. So despite there being a lot of kind of really good kind of Chinese companies building stuff on Bitcoin, building exchanges, building wallets, etc. There wasn't a huge amount of like community outreach, I felt at the time. And we ended up sort of holding a few kind of events organized internally by guys at OkCoin, to kind of reach out a little bit more to the community in general.
Yeah. So is that kind of where the Beijing Bitcoin meetup stems from?
Yeah. So I think the first kind of instance of a Bitcoin meetup in Beijing would have been done by Jake Smith.
Okay.
No longer a Bitcoiner.
Yeah.
But RIP. But after that, I think at OkCoin, we kind of managed to get some sponsorship, as it were, a few from management at OkCoin to set up an event and to go around. So I wasn't particularly focused on organising it. I was just there helping move chairs around and whatever needed to be done. But I enjoyed kind of the events that got set up, and gradually kind of got more and more involved and going along to this. Yeah,
I'm always interested in kind of those early kind of meetup scenes in different places. We're here this week, and Dominic put a lot of this together. Started with the Bitcoin meetup here, but we had an interesting panel actually talking about kind of community in Bitcoin around the world. Yeah, and I think Leo had some kind of against the grain points on how the kind of meetup scene community doesn't really need to be there going forward. How it's going to be kind of but anyway.
I think the Beijing Bitcoin meetup. So I mean, there's been issues around that in terms of like China bans Bitcoin every few months, sure. As I'm sure you're aware. I think the real kind of issues that we've had with the meetup was when Chaoyang district in Beijing, which is where we normally host our meetups, banned events related to virtual currencies, as they call them. So at that point...
What year was that?
That was just last year, I think. Okay. So it was a case of finding a venue was a little bit harder at that time. Obviously, we pivoted to Lightning Network meetups rather than Bitcoin meetups. That's right, which
obfuscated a little bit,
all about the tech. So we still managed to hold a couple of events, but it's been more difficult. And also, I think that there was a period of time where people were coming up over to China a lot more regularly in terms of Bitcoiners. And that seems to have died off. And I think that's a function of, at the time, people thinking that China was important to Bitcoin. And now people realizing that that's not necessarily the case, and the miners don't necessarily run Bitcoin. And I think SegWit 2x and all of that fun was something that kind of changed people's perspective of the role that China plays in Bitcoin. And unfortunately, that means that we've had less speakers to come over and join our events. But generally speaking, I think that's a good thing for Bitcoin.
Yeah, and you're bringing up things that are probably worth an entire discussion in their own right. So we'll maybe stay away from that here. We're going too long, but I think I agree with where you're going. So you join. You mentioned Huobi. Kind of the other, I guess, the competitive landscape of exchanges there is it's all the two biggest BTCCs down in Shanghai, which is where I end up being. Kind of other companies in Bitcoin in China. Are you kind of in touch with these folks? Or are you more kind of focused on what are you doing at OkCoin when you join? What's kind of your role there? Kind of things.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I was working in like Regtech. So my kind of personal kind of focus was on the kind of business processes and the technology, but obviously I was one of the people that kind of understood the compliance landscape that not very many people in the Bitcoin scene did. Yeah. So when I came into OkCoin, that was one of my focuses on kind of helping them kind of understand what the regulations were, what the regulations weren't, whether there were any, and
position fraught with peril there
to position them in the kind of correct way. I don't think it was a huge deal at the time because the regulations were very kind of non-existent, as it were. It was more kind of just looking at kind of best practices and sort of guiding us towards that kind of area. In terms of the landscape, I think Huobi were always considered our kind of big kind of competitor, and a lot of kind of the internal kind of marketing team were always trying to get one over on Huobi.
Some interesting stories about that here and now, how that's happening.
But I think at a kind of higher level, then that was not necessarily the case. And so I think that it always made more sense for Bitcoiners and Bitcoin kind of exchanges to kind of have a closer kind of relationship and like realize what the kind of real enemy was, as it were, rather than trying to sort of fight internally between themselves. So again, that was not something I kind of publicly or even behind the scenes got involved in the kind of fight between OkCoin and Huobi. I was just kind of focused on our own stuff at OkCoin.
Yeah, and really that's kind of something that, hey, like, United Front for Bitcoin is something that I think probably most people would agree with, but it's just so competitive. It's tough back then especially. But so Star Shoes, the CEO and founder, while you're there, obviously still there. I mean, really one of the long-term guys in Bitcoin. Any kind of insights from working with him, working for him for, a tech company in China that's grown how it has? Any kind of insights into how he operated and what y'all did?
Yeah, so, I mean, we left on good terms when I left. And I think you just have to kind of respect anybody who's kind of been in the industry that long and isn't sitting in a cage. So I think he's done a good job, generally speaking. No exit scam or anything. So that's a generally kind of positive point. It was my first time, despite being in China for on and off for quite a long time. It was my first time working for a Chinese company. So I guess there were still some kind of cultural differences, and working for a Bitcoin Chinese company, then it's probably amplified by 100x, just like leverage. So yeah, there was certainly some differences in kind of like management style and how the kind of company ran, but yeah, I think you've got to respect anybody who's been in Bitcoin for that long.
For sure. And one thing people kind of talk about is like kind of from the kind of terminology wise, coming from kind of the PayPal Mafia and people who went on to found companies from the PayPal group. So people talk about the Coinbase Mafia, but really OkCoin has had just a kind of an amazing number of people leave there to found their own companies, some in China, some more, kind of global, like what you've done. Any thoughts on kind of why it came out of OkCoin, kind of company culture, or any of the things that have come out of that group? It doesn't get as much recognition, I guess, as obviously something more in the West.
Well, I think if you're into Bitcoin in 2014 and you're willing to join an upstart exchange in China, and a lot of people that joined OkCoin come from higher paying jobs in higher paying industries and had taken a salary cuts and things like that to come and work in Bitcoin because they kind of believed in Bitcoin. So I think that's definitely has an effect. It was a kind of place where people came to kind of learn about the industry and how the industry worked.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I think there's also an element of you've got to realize that it was a big risk to be working in Bitcoin. At the time, nobody kind of knew what was going to happen with Bitcoin. I think, obviously, that's one of the reasons why you've got to respect these guys who have been doing it for such a long time, like Star. You can't kind of be too kind of risk averse and still be successful. So I think you had that kind of culture within the company of people who are kind of willing to take risks, and obviously that led to people being able to kind of set up their own businesses. I think in terms of OkCoin Mafia, I think the most famous would obviously be CZ, who's gone on to start Binance. So at the time, the only shitcoin we had on OkCoin was Litecoin. So I wasn't aware of his shitcoin analysis. But yeah, certainly he's another kind of risk taker, and he's gone out to build a very successful business based on that. So fair play. Yeah.
On CZ, any insights into how he was at OkCoin? Did you see this coming?
Well, I think again, he's a guy who chose to move into the Bitcoin industry, chose to work for an existing company when I think he was previously kind of working for himself, or at least very kind of senior management in the place that he was before. So again, he was sort of taking a risk with his own career by joining
over there.
OkCoin. And I think we all had also sort of taken those risks in terms of like buying Bitcoin when Bitcoin was at a lower price. So I guess in terms of that kind of mindset, then that's probably one of the things that that helped. Again, also Bitcoin being such a kind of nascent industry at the time, I think there was a kind of get things done kind of attitude that needed to be there. And so again, I think that's something that definitely helps in sort of starting up your own business.
For sure. Kind of in your role, were you there during the kind of periods of kind of increased scrutiny from regulators and from the government at OK? Any insight into the kind of that? When did that start to happen? Anything around that?
Yeah. So while I was there, we didn't have too much really. I think the most significant thing we would have would be a visit from the police in terms of like the financial affairs division. But then, as with now, in fact, their primary concern was people getting scammed with like Ponzi schemes, etc., rather than kind of Bitcoin as a kind of instrument for doing nefarious things in and of itself. So yeah, in terms of the scrutiny, that was the kind of the main thing that we had. And even at the time, I don't think it was necessarily like the police kind of doing a kind of big investigation into like where did funds flow or anything like that. It was kind of more of a did somebody scam somebody and give them a BTC address that was it was an exchange address where that exchange address was owned by OkCoin. So it was very kind of simple kind of stuff.
Simple fraud type stuff.
Yeah.
And then there, kind of you mentioned people Bitcoiners started coming to OK to kind of say, hey, I want to get into this. And OK is one of the dominant companies there. And there are a few Western folks who were joining at that time. Was the culture there kind of, what made it more welcoming of that type of kind of expat than like a Hobie who's also there, maybe doesn't have a reputation as having as many?
Well, I think Zane Tackett, who was the community manager, I think.
Shout out to Zane.
Shout out to Zane. I think he was a large part of that.
Okay. Was he there before you?
Yes. So he obviously had a big presence on Reddit and places like that. So obviously, I think people felt kind of more comfortable coming to kind of OkCoin and understanding that there was that kind of culture somewhere within the company that allowed somebody like Zane to shitpost on Reddit or whatever he was doing. So I think definitely a big shout out to Zane on that front. And how that sort of came to sort of build out that team, I'm not sure, but obviously Star decided that was kind of at the time the route that he wanted to go with, and we managed to get a nice little kind of core team going, and we had a period of time that was really cool. Yeah,
that's cool. And I remember I hadn't joined in the industry full time yet at that point. I remember kind of browsing, who was hiring and browsing kind of open spots at OkCoin because I knew that it was kind of an opportunity.
Yeah.
Before David was able to bring me on at BTC Media. Companies, 100 people or so at that point. Now, obviously, it's 10, 20x that, or it's been up and down in that range.
Yeah, I think with all these companies, that's what I said before. Like, never count a company out. It can sort of go down, get rid of a lot of people, and then 2 years later, it's again the leading company in the space. So you never kind of know.
Yeah, props to the leadership for being resilient enough to get through those things. And maybe more of a sensitive question. Any of these kind of big tech companies in China, obviously it's been in the press in the US, how maybe the party starts to have a say, or at least kind of be in the room when decisions are being made at these big tech companies. Did you see any of that start to happen while you were still at OkCoin, or was it still kind of a smaller thing at that point?
So I think with all of these kind of companies, then we expect that this stuff at least happens in the sidelines. So it doesn't necessarily need to be very kind of explicit. As soon as you get into a kind of bigger company, then you may have a kind of special room for the party kind of office within a company. So there will be people who are employed by the company but essentially work for the government directly. So that's not something that we had at any time while we were in OkCoin. I think that sort of government liaison piece was still at a stage where it could be done just by sort of side conversations with the CEO. But yeah, like I mentioned, it was mainly the kind of concerns that we experienced within the kind of company as a whole was still mostly about kind of people getting scammed via Ponzi schemes. And I think, to be honest, as the government, then your main concern is social unrest. And at the moment, Bitcoin hasn't succeeded to the point where it's causing kind of that social unrest. The thing that's causing social unrest is where you have 4 million people who get scammed out of 200,000 Bitcoin, which I think is what happened with one of these Ponzi schemes recently. Yep. And when you've got 4 million unhappy people, that's more of an issue for the government than a few people playing around with Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's when people ask me about what the government is actually concerned about, it's kind of what I point to also. But I think most people, unless they're talking to people who've been in that situation or been in China and seen it, don't really get what the real concern is about.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is that you sort of, the way that you can explain that is you say, oh, they're more interested in consumer protection or something. And that's true. Mm-hmm. But the reason that they're interested in consumer protection is obviously the unrest when you have 4 million people who have been scammed out of money. And these are people who expect the government to look after them. Then they're not people who have an idea. They're not Bitcoiners who believe in self-sovereignty and being responsible for your own decisions. They're people who have grown up being told that the government's going to look after them. So if the government allows a situation to take place where they lose money, then that's the first person that they're going to complain to. So it's in kind of everybody's interest to make sure that they aren't scammed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just such a super interesting time to be, in Bitcoin in China at kind of the nexus where it's all happening in Beijing at OkCoin. Any other, we've kind of covered some of it. Any other interesting tidbits from that time? Anything else to add?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I agree with you. It was a fantastic sort of time to be there, and obviously helped kind of propel me onto what I decided to do going forwards. I did a year at OkCoin, learned a lot, and then it was sort of time to move on. Fortunately, I missed the whole time working in a Chinese company where the ICO kind of craze happened. So I think if I'd been there at that time, then I would have had more kind of interesting tidbits and maybe some more kind of complaints. But as it is, I'm pretty comfortable with how that all worked out.
Yeah, I don't know how long you could have outlasted it, but mix with all that. So you do your year, again, the self-selection. So you're thinking about you're an entrepreneurial guy. So you're starting to think about what else you can do. Kind of take us through the process of like, hey, I'm going to go start my own venture, and what happens with Remitsy, how that starts.
Sure. So I guess I don't know kind of what the there was no sort of particular kind of trigger that sort of determined that everybody was going to kind of leave OkCoin, but it sort of seemed we sort of seemed to get to a kind of natural point. And around that 1 year mark, a few of us from the kind of international team decided that that was kind of about time to move on. I think maybe we could say that there was one trigger, and this may be an interesting tidbit. I think Starshoe went to the US for a kind of conference. He came back thinking that he understood the US market completely perfectly. But, we may not have all kind of agreed on that in the direction that the company was moving after that. But it was no like one sort of particular thing. It was just more of a kind of general kind of direction. And
can you expand on the general direction? What do you mean?
Well, I guess I think we as a kind of international kind of core team within the company kind of sort of understood what the US kind of traders were looking for, what Bitcoiners were looking for. Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily like giveaways of BMWs and things like that. So I think we had a kind of more maybe more professional kind of idea for how we wanted to kind of take the exchange forward, whereas kind of management had a kind of different vision for that exchange.
Okay.
Obviously, the model has survived, which is the most important thing. So obviously, props to all of the people that stayed. But a bunch of us decided that we'd kind of move on and see what else there was for us in the Bitcoin industry. And I guess as Bitcoiners, a lot of us kind of have that kind of idea of self-sovereignty and being responsible for our own things. So we want to make sure that we can kind of own the work that we do, decisions that we make. And so the natural kind of progression for me from there was to look at kind of what businesses we could potentially do using kind of Bitcoin. So I guess in 2015, I set up Remitsy. Remitsy was a cross-border payments company using Bitcoin as a settlement rail. And that was the next step after OkCoin.
Yeah, Remitsy. No, I think probably for the first year that I knew you, I didn't know your last name. I just knew you as Richard Remitsy. That's what you were on WeChat, and what you were branding yourself with the company very well throughout the whole process. So maybe describe just a bit more kind of the business and your customers. You're servicing customers mostly. Kind of moving money into China. Just describe that a little bit, what you were doing.
Yeah, sure. So we were a cross-border payments provider focused on SMEs. So we were helping small businesses make payments to their suppliers in China.
Okay.
We were using Bitcoin as our kind of intra-company settlement rail. So from the customer perspective, they didn't have to touch Bitcoin at all. We were just using kind of Bitcoin because we thought it was a superior kind of way to move money.
It's a popular use case at the time, for sure.
Yeah, it was a popular use case. I think, so talking previously about Star and CZ and being risk takers, I think we at Remitsy were a bit too risk adverse, meaning we didn't do any kind of outbound remittances. So on a day-to-day basis, we would get requests for this stuff, but we left that to one side. And our clients were all pretty kind of vanilla in terms of what they were using for us. We had sort of extensive documentation on what the use case of the payment was, so that we would be kind of comfortable doing this transaction. So we were mainly competing with people who are using Western Union, PayPal, and sort of bank transfers to do these payments, and we were offering a kind of better solution.
Yeah, and it was faster?
Yeah, so definitely faster. So we were offering payments in 6 hours. It was a good rate, so we would offer mid-market rates, plus a small fee for the transaction. Very open in terms of what our business model was, how we earned money, etc. But again, it was we weren't sort of naive going into this. We understood that the compliance piece was the main kind of barrier to all of this kind of international transfers. So yeah, we weren't sort of Bitcoin fixes this necessarily. We were building a business where Bitcoin was used, but yeah, Bitcoin fixes it, but only if you're actually kind of interacting directly end user to end user with Bitcoin. Having us in the middle, we still had to go through all of those kind of compliance loops, and that made it a lot more friction. It meant that we couldn't, having talked about being kind of risk takers, etc. We couldn't necessarily take all of those risks, especially sort of being a foreigner based in China. Sometimes I think it's quite irresponsible for kind of influencers to sort of say, entrepreneurs should take risks. If that risk involves you ending up in a cage, then that's not something you should be sort of willing to tell people to do.
Right. Probably something people don't appreciate if they live in the US or the UK or somewhere where that's not as likely to happen, I guess.
And not as likely, but still, I wouldn't say it's unlikely. I think we've seen just today one of the guys who travelled to North Korea has been put in a cage by the US for having taught people about blockchain technology, I guess. So it's very similar to yeah. I mean, this is like back in the day. I remember when I was a kid, and this kind of didn't necessarily play a direct effect on me being into Bitcoin, but I sort of noticed these patterns now. Now it comes later. I was kind of big into encryption and PGP technology when I was in kind of high school, I guess, and the whole Perl scripts on a T-shirt to do encryption was.
How were you interacting with it at that point? How are you?
Well, I remember at the time I just kind of used again. I just used the technology, so lurking and using the technology. So I remember at the time you had to download it from certain mirrors when you were in the UK, which is where I'm from, because obviously if you'd exported it directly from a US server, then you'd be breaking US ammunition sort of export rules or something like that. So it's like kind of coming back to thinking about this, and then you think about the guy who's just going over and sort of doing a talk about some technology. Then you realise it's kind of got parallels with that time when the way around it was kind of wearing a T-shirt or doing these kind of mirrors and things like that.
Yeah, in high school.
I mean, I didn't have the T-shirts itself. I downloaded a copy of like the codes to print your own T-shirt, but I never bothered doing it.
Yeah. I think about you as being like in Bitcoin for the tech, but I guess, even going back past that, kind of some of the just ideological things like encryption and things like that. I guess it makes sense that you feel the way you do now.
I think I sort of see, I see things in my past that have kind of led me to here. Maybe I wasn't thinking about it at the time. So in it for the tech, as it were. Obviously, Bitcoin number go up is also good. But yeah, so some things that have kind of been there throughout my life, they're all sort of maybe coming together into kind of Bitcoin and the way I kind of think about this right now.
Then when you started Remitsy and you were kind of putting the, I guess, founding team together, were you were all kind of aligned in that way around the tech and stuff when you did? What was the team like?
So my co-founder Neil Woodfine also joined Remitsy from OkCoin. So we met at OkCoin, worked together for a year there, or just less than a year, and I think we'd aligned somewhat in terms of like Bitcoin, but I think the more time that we spent at Remitsy, kind of working directly with one another, was kind of more influential in kind of getting our views even stronger, kind of aligned, and him helping sort of drag me down the rabbit hole, as it were, because I'd come with
strong views.
I'd come from a more kind of traditional kind of background, I guess. And whilst I kind of understood that the kind of the jobs that I was doing previously were kind of fake jobs, they didn't have any kind of use in the world. I kind of came to realise that more and more as I was working in Remitsy, and as all of these kind of compliance rules and things like that were actually hampering the abilities for people across borders to transact with one another. So the more I kind of learned about that, the more I went down that role. And so we also had a cool team of people that worked with us, and some of those were kind of strong kind of Bitcoiners who had played around again with the tech, and others were completely new, but that we got them into it, and we gave them their first Bitcoin. One of the guys that we just brought in for like a day just to do like a coding kind of sort of hackathon with us to like look at how we were kind of interacting with exchanges. Ended up doing his whole sort of arbitrage kind of Bitcoin fund based on, and when we were the first person to introduce him to Bitcoin. So I think we paid him 1 Bitcoin for a day's work or something like that. And he used that to, or I don't know whether he used that, but he started doing arb trading.
That's great. That's great.
And then we have many kind of stories about this from either not necessarily from Remitsy, but also the Bitcoin meetup, and sort of helping people to kind of get into Bitcoin, helping people to avoid getting scammed, and it's great to see what people have done. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I can't imagine working with you and Neil every day and not getting pulled into it. That's great. So I guess kind of cross-border payments was one of the use cases that was popular then in terms of like, hey, there's a feature for this. Any kind of thoughts now on kind of where real use cases are, business cases compared to then? How do you think about that now compared to then, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for most of us Bitcoiners, then use cases was never kind of the end goal. Bitcoin is.
Yeah,
that's enough.
Bitcoin is.
Yeah, Bitcoin is. I think that's beauty on. But yeah, I think it's also important that we kind of went through this stage to learn more, and actually to learn more about how the current financial system works, without sort of having to sort of fight against it in some way. Not necessarily fight against it, but to work within it. Then you kind of realize where all of the kind of bottlenecks are and where things don't work and where Bitcoin fixes this. Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad stage to go through, but I don't feel as Bitcoin needing use cases. I think Bitcoin is the use case.
Yeah, Bitcoin is. Beyond. He needs to unblock our guy Christian on Twitter, by the way. Have you met Christian from our team? I don't know if he's been any of the.
I don't think so. I'm not sure if I may be blocked from beauty on as well. But
that's a fellow UKer, yeah.
But that phrase is definitely on point, and a bunch of what he says is pretty useful.
Yeah. So Remitsy, that's kind of what I knew you from initially, and obviously you had an exit, a successful kind of venture ended up being. Any other kind of tidbits from your time there, and then. I guess would you be doing anything? Would you do anything differently if you were going back to that time? Leaving OkCoin Remitsy through the exit to Wyre, where y'all were, you sold to Wyre.
Yeah, so I don't think I necessarily would have done. I think that I would have had a very different journey if we'd taken a kind of less risk-averse approach. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to sort of replay that sort of in a kind of alternate reality and just check out how that worked out, and to see whether that would have been successful or whether it wouldn't. But as it is, I think that I'm relatively happy to have taken the path that we chose to take. I guess as a kind of sovereign individual, then I would even consider an IPO a failure rather than a success. Okay. You want to kind of own your own business and your own labor and everything. So selling to Wyre was absolutely the right kind of choice at that time, and it was a great sort of learning experience to work with their team in the US as well. So no, I wouldn't have done anything differently, but it would have been interesting to kind of see how it would have played out if I had done.
Yeah, always. No regrets. No. Where was the Remitsy entity based when it was acquired? Was it?
Sure. So I mean, we had a Beijing, and so our team based in Beijing. Uh-huh. We had a Chinese and a Hong Kong sort of holding company. So we got acquired as a whole of the kind of assets within the company.
Anything structurally with being acquired as a Chinese-based company being acquired?
Yeah, there was no issues because we'd kind of set it up very kind of carefully at the outset. Gotcha. So we had a holding company, and it was only needed for the holding company to be acquired that 100% owned the Chinese company. So sure. That was relatively smooth. And I think, I guess, again, with sort of how we'd structured everything and everything we've done, we'd taken that approach, which meant that this stuff was a little bit easier.
Yeah, cool. And so Wyre, you're acquired. I guess your role after the acquisition is kind of head of Asia. Maybe explain that a little more context for kind of the position you're in once the acquisition was completed.
Yeah, so Wyre is obviously they were focused at the time on cross-border payments, very similar to what Remitsy was doing. Yep. So we kind of naturally fitted in to the company. It was a case of moving our existing client base across onto the Wyre platform, and also helping sort of Wyre out with some of their kind of business processes to make that kind of more efficient. So that was a good experience. We spent some time over in the US working with the team there, but I was kind of based still in Beijing, and my role, as you said, was leading up on sort of Asia-based kind of opportunities. So again, that was kind of operational, but also sort of business development, I guess. And we were working with people who were moving money kind of cross-border, and we had sort of more a bigger sort of product set. So where at Remitsy, we were limited to working with a small kind of subset of SMEs moving money between mainly Europe and China. By joining Wyre, we had a lot more kind of, still we didn't do any China outbound, but we had a lot more kind of inbound sort of businesses. So working with the US along in terms of that. So yeah, it was a good experience, and I guess I kind of learned a lot.
Yeah. And so kind of that increased scope you mentioned, I guess you mentioned BD is kind of a new kind of something that you're responsible for out there. What kind of markets in Asia really interest you most outside of China? You spent a lot of your career in China. We're in Vietnam now. When you were at Wyre, what kind of other markets became more interesting to you when you had that increased kind of scope of responsibility?
Sure. So I think, and part of this reason will be because this kind of coincided with the ICO kind of bubble and the amount of kind of scams that were happening around that time. So actually
getting into 2017 here, summer of 2017.
Yeah. So I think we got acquired in early 2017. So yeah, the sort of timing was perfect for me to sort of pull myself out of all of this nonsense and focus on where I could kind of add more value. So during that time, I was focused more on more kind of traditional kind of fintech business use cases. So I was avoiding most of the stuff that sort of touched crypto at all, really. And yes, sort of seeing where there were those use cases within Asia. So outside of China, I think Korea and Japan were the areas that were kind of most interesting for me. And that was a function of the fact that they were kind of more kind of the regulatory system was kind of more developed there. Generally speaking, I actually like the kind of Chinese approach to this. So the Chinese approach, in my experience, is do something, wait for the government to tell you not to do it. And there's that kind of social contract that the government knows that if they tell you, you're going to stop doing it. And that seems to work quite well, and it doesn't sort of hamper innovation too much. In Japan and Korea, it's a lot more regulated. It's a lot more wait for approval before doing anything. But fortunately, there was already some of these kind of regulations in place, which meant that we could offer these services to kind of enterprise clients, and we work with those. So that was what's more interesting for me. And I was getting more into coding at the time as well. So I was really kind of trying to catch up. But yeah, using that as something that I could help the company with, because we had. Most of our engineers were obviously based in the US, so I got au fait with how we interacted with how a client can interact with the system. Taught myself how to kind of be that client, and then worked with clients to actually help them with their kind of integrations. So that was something that was personally something that I'd wanted to spend some more time on for a while. And in that position, I was able to do that. So yeah, that was kind of how I spent my time. So I withdrew quite a bit.
Dark ages of the ICO
from the Bitcoin scene. I blocked a lot of people on WeChat who were promoting ICOs, and we just sort of head down coding, working with sort of enterprise clients, and getting stuff done.
For sure. So I had a good experience there. The industry goes through its, has to go through its ICO phase. So now you're at Blockstream, I guess newly announced, kind of in charge of Liquid and partnerships out here. So I guess take us through the transition there, leaving Wyre. What were you doing in the meantime? When did you start to jump back in when you felt like the industry was cleaner again?
Sure. So yeah. So I think our paths and sort of interest diverged at Wyre. back in sort of 2018, I guess. It was already that. But I was already kind of focused. I had my own kind of niche within the company that I was working on in terms of the Asian clients, in terms of the enterprise sales, in terms of helping with the kind of integrations already. So I was able to do that for a while, despite the kind of main sort of thrust of the company going in a different direction. But eventually, that always didn't kind of make sense to keep that sort of focus when we were moving in different directions. So in the end, I kind of decided to move away from that, and I was just looking. I didn't really want to sort of start up anything new myself. I was kind of done with that for a while. I wanted to, again, keep my head down and focus on coding. So I took some time off and sort of taught myself again. I seem to have kept on teaching myself how to do stuff, and yet I've never learned properly. So I'm still the eternal student, and I haven't got.
Good way to keep the mind sharp, at least, even if you don't get where you want to be.
Yeah, I haven't really got much further, but I basically decided to spend some time kind of focused on coding, and I was just playing around with kind of different technologies. One of the things that I was playing around with was Liquid, which is a kind of Blockstream product, Bitcoin sidechain. So I was playing around with the technology. It's obviously kind of open source; anyone can just download it and play around with it. And Neil, who from my OkCoin and Remitsy days had already started working at Blockstream for over a year, I guess.
Okay.
And so every time I was coming up with a question, then I was immediately kind of pinging him on Signal and asking him.
You had to ping him because he's not in Beijing anymore.
He's not in Beijing anymore, no. So I can
escape to the warmth.
Yes, I can knock down his door and grab him over a beer and try and ask him to answer all my questions. So I was just annoying him on a daily basis whilst I was trying to figure this technology out. And I guess he got fed up of me asking all of those questions. And so had an internal conversation with the guys at Blockstream and sort of said, okay, how do I get this guy off my back? Can you just give him a job so that he doesn't have to ask those questions? So now had some good conversations with some of the guys at Blockstream, and ended up taking a position doing sales and integrations within for the company. So my focus right now is mainly on people here in Asia, just because that's where I'm physically based, and there's obviously a lot of people out here who could use the sidechain that we've developed. And I'm sort of taking the lead on that right now.
Heck yeah. You joined the evil empire there. But
I think that many people assumed that I was a Blockstream employee for the last how many years. So during the kind of Segwit 2X.
We'll have to come back to that for a longer talk.
I've been accused of being a Blockstream employee then, and obviously when Bcash split out, I called it Bcash, which obviously meant that I was on the paycheck. So I decided.
Now that you're inside, is it more laughable? Like the kind of conspiracy theories that you hear all the time from kind of Bcash folks or whoever else. Is it more laughable now that you're on the inside that's ever?
Yeah, it's complete nonsense. I was, but then to be honest, I'm working remote, so the team is quite dispersed, right? So we have people all over the world. So we have a company get together, hopefully next year, I think. So I'll get to see them all, and then maybe in the after party, after we have our big sort of get together, they'll take off their fake human skin, and I'll be able to see the lizard people underneath.
Yeah. Cool. So you're still based out of Beijing. Any kind of how are you thinking about kind of the environment in China today for Bitcoin? Changes since 2013. What's your kind of overview right now?
Well, I think the kind of main kind of exchanges and the main people, like I said, they've been around for a while now, and they've survived through a lot of kind of difficult times. So I think that that means that they have at least tacit if not support, but recognition of kind of what they're doing, and the fact that they're doing it in a way that isn't too problematic for the government in China. Mm-hmm. So I think we'll see the kind of big kind of exchanges survive for the most part, but where the government doesn't so much like things is where people aren't physically in China. When you're not kind of physically in China, then you have kind of less, if you're sort of promoting stuff to Chinese residents, then that's kind of more problematic. So I think you'll see that sort of companies that don't have a physical presence in China will have some kind of more issues in dealing with China, and the ones that do have physical presence, so long as they're the sort that's ticking all of the right boxes, they will survive and maybe flourish, but we'll see. I think that Bitcoin in general, it doesn't seem to have the kind of passion necessarily, or the ethos in China that we see in certain communities, certainly on Twitter. Maybe it doesn't have it anywhere in the world. Maybe I'm living in a maximalist bubble. Yeah. But certainly in China, I think that we see much more focus on using Bitcoin for number go up, rather than kind of sovereignty of one's own money, which seems crazy, seeing as the fact that China is has capital controls, meaning that you can't easily get money. You theoretically can't easily get money out of China. I think Bitcoin didn't necessarily succeed in that use case, I guess, because people have traditionally had many other workarounds to that solution. Yeah. So things like, I'm mentioning China Law Blog earlier, and I remember reading on there the case of a company suing itself in the US and having to pay itself millions of dollars as a way to remit money out of China. And you can present a law case to the bank to show that, this is the reason why I'm paying this money. So there's been loads and loads of workarounds to those issues in the past. So just having another one workaround was maybe not as big a thing as people as sort of other people outside of China maybe thought it would be. So that ethos hasn't really traditionally been there. I'm not sure whether it will come. I think it will do, but I think it will do for everybody everywhere in the world. And that's just the inevitable consequence of Bitcoin. We just need to get there. It may take another 10, 20 years, whatever.
There it is. Yeah, we're gonna have to dive into some of the stuff that you're kind of getting to the edge of again later. But it's good to have the kind of full background and history of kind of your experience from your vantage point of Bitcoin in China from kind of 12 to now. But yeah, it's been super interesting. We'll let it go here, but before, I guess one last thing, more of a Beijing and cultural thing for anyone who's going to be in the area. One recommendation for Beijing can be a restaurant, can be a book, can be a movie, just anything Beijing related to recommendation that you think that someone who's not based there would gain from knowing about experiencing.
Oh, well, I mean,
food, the flower company.
food is always a good one. So I had a restaurant right in my office. Peng Mei Mian Zhuang. It's a Peng Mei is a fat lady, I guess. And Mian Zhuang is a noodle house. Has the best Chongqing noodles.
What are Chongqing noodles for the layman?
So if you're a layman for Chongqing noodles, you probably don't want to eat it. They're spicy as hell. But yes, just a bowl of red with some noodles in them. And that would be one of my recommendations for Beijing. But also, I think anybody visiting Beijing should definitely kind of look me up. And if you're a Bitcoiner, get in touch, and hopefully we can sort out an event in Beijing. So the Beijing Bitcoin meetup has had a quiet time since there were some government rules about hosting meetups related to virtual currency. But that seems to have died down now, so we're looking to get more of those events in the calendar. And it's always good when people come to Beijing and can share their kind of experience from outside of China to the kind of local audience. So we normally try to have speakers in English and Chinese. So if anyone's visiting town, then they should definitely look me up and see whether we can get anything sorted.
Heck yeah.
So that and Chongqing noodles.
And Richard's one of the bilingual but also very bicultural people in China, which is can be a hard thing to attain for people who are not from China. So very cool. And we'll put it in the show notes, but Twitter, you are?
I am at Richard Bensberg. I decided not to. I think I may have had a few pseudonymous accounts in my time, but they all disappeared. So yeah, anything I tweet is I know that it's going to be attached to my name. So I think that's a sensible approach to it.
All right, Richard Bensberg on Twitter. We'll let it go for now, but we'll catch back up again.
Awesome.
A quick reminder, all of the content in this episode is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. Nothing contained in this presentation constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, endorsement, or offer by BTC Media, the Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast network, or any third-party service provider to buy or sell any securities or other financial instruments.